Stand at the edge of the dark, watery void in Genesis chapter 1. A voice speaks, and 6 days of creation unfold. The cadence is perfectly ordered. Light, firmament, dry land, stars, birds, beasts, man, a completed cosmos sealed with a seventh day of rest. But read the account carefully. Comb through every single line of those first chapter decrees. Someone is missing. An entire spiritual army. The seraphim with their 6 wings, the cherubim guarding the veil, the archangels, millions of heavenly entities that make up the divine council, blazing with fire. Genesis chapter 1 tells you exactly when God made the creeping things of the earth. It tells you exactly when he hung the sun and the moon. It says absolutely nothing about when he made the angels. It is a glaring chronological silence. We assume the angelic host is simply there, existing eternally outside of time. But they are created beings. They have a beginning, a start date. And that missing origin date becomes a massive fracture in the timeline the moment you turn to the book of Job. Picture it. The King James Version, Job chapter 38. God is speaking to a broken man out of a violent whirlwind, pulling back the curtain on the dawn of time. He demands of Job in verse 4, "Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth?" And then he adds a detail that shatters the standard Genesis timeline. Verse 7, "When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy." Stop right there. The sons of God, the ancient Hebrew designation for the angelic host. Watch what the text does. According to Job, they are already alive, already assembled, watching the very foundation of the physical earth being laid. They are shouting for joy as the dirt and the deep take shape, which means they had to be created before the earth was finished. Yet the blueprint of Genesis leaves their creation out completely. To solve this missing origin, to find the exact moment this terrifying host was forged, we have to open a text preserved outside the West. A scroll the early church called the Little Genesis, the Book of Jubilees, kept completely intact for thousands of years within the Ethiopian Orthodox canon. Jubilees provides a rigid, expanded chronology of the Genesis narrative. It is the history behind the history. And what Jubilees does with the opening verses of our Bible shifts the entire landscape of creation. It forces us to look at the first day and realize we have only been seeing half the picture. See the scene. Genesis 1, verse 3. "And God said, let there be light, and there was light." We have always read this as a purely physical event. The flicking of a cosmic switch, the sudden illumination of a dead, watery rock before the sun was even formed. The first light. But Jubilees looks at this primordial, pre-solar fire and sees something else. It sees a birthing room. The voice speaking into the dark void was not just illuminating the water. We have always read, "Let there be light," as the dawn of the physical universe. But the Ethiopian vault holds a radically different memory of that primordial flash. What exactly woke up inside the fire of the first day? See the peak of Mount Sinai. Exodus chapter 24, verse 18. "And Moses went into the midst of the cloud, and gat him up into the mount. And Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. We know what he brings down to the camp: the tablets of stone, the law, the architectural blueprint for the tabernacle. But the Book of Jubilees claims that during those 40 days inside the thick, dark cloud, Moses received something else. A second, unbroken, terrifyingly exact chronological history of the universe. I offer this as their telling, one ancient Jewish memory preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, not as final canonical fact. Test it the way the Bereans tested everything. Jubilees chapter 1 frames itself as a secret history dictated to Moses by a high-ranking entity called the Angel of the Presence. It is a calendar of the cosmos, tracking the jubilees of time. And when this angel begins to recount the very first week of creation to Moses in chapter 2, the ancient text does something Genesis completely refuses to do. It categorizes the invisible. We assume the spiritual realm operates entirely outside the boundaries of physical time. We treat eternity and the creation week as two separate rooms. We think the angels were simply hovering in the background, standing in the void, waiting for the physical clock to start. But Jubilees locks the heavenly host inside the timeline. It gives them a birthday. Picture it. Genesis 1, verse 2. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Stop right there. Look at that word, spirit. In the original Hebrew, it is ruach. It translates as spirit, but it also carries the physical weight of wind, breath, an invisible, kinetic force hovering over a dead, watery void. The elements of the first day are raw, unshaped, and violent. Deep water, absolute darkness, the ruach moving. And then comes the famous command in verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. According to the Ethiopian vault, this flash of pre-solar fire was not merely physical illumination. Jubilees chapter 2, verse 2 records the exact inventory of what was manifested in that single blinding moment. It states plainly that on the first day, God created the upper heavens, the earth, the waters, and all the spirits serving before him. Read that again. The angels are not eternal entities without a beginning. They are day one creations. They are forged in the exact same 24-hour window as the deep water and the dark. The ancient scroll binds the spiritual army directly to the physical ignition of the universe. When the voice of God spoke into the dark, the resulting light did not just push back the shadows. It shattered into millions of distinct, burning consciousnesses. The first light is the raw material of the watchers. We have spent centuries reading Genesis 1 as the story of rocks and oceans and plants. But this text forces us to read the opening verses as a sudden, violent military assembly. If Jubilees is right, the first day is infinitely more crowded than we ever realized. But what exactly are these newly forged beings made of, and why does the Hebrew word for wind hold the secret to their terrifying nature? Read the inventory list in Jubilees chapter 2, verse 2. Moses is standing in the cloud on Sinai, and the angel of the presence dictates exactly what was made on the first day. It is a terrifying ledger. It does not just say God made angels. It breaks the heavenly host down by species, locking them directly into the raw elements of the unformed earth. The ancient text declares that God created the upper heavens, the earth, the waters, and all the spirits serving before him, and then it names them. The angels of the presence, the angels of sanctification, the angels of the spirit of fire. Hold that image. Turn to Psalm 104, verse 4. The psalmist writes, "Who maketh his angels spirits, his ministers a flaming fire?" We have almost always read that as poetry, a beautiful metaphor describing their speed, their loyalty, or their brightness. But the ancient Jewish mind did not read it as a metaphor. They read it as a blueprint. If the Book of Jubilees is correct, the angels are literally composed of the primordial fire and wind ignited on day one. They are forged from the exact elemental material they were born into. I offer this as their telling, one ancient Jewish memory preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, not as final canonical fact. But watch how this ancient framework violently redefines the verses we have memorized since childhood. Go back to the canonical text, Genesis 1, verse 4. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. Stop right there. We assume God is dividing daytime from nighttime. a simple separation of the 24-hour clock so the earth can breathe. But read the timeline carefully. The sun does not exist yet. The moon is not there. The stars are not hung in the firmament until day 4. You cannot have daytime or nighttime without a sun to cast a shadow on a rotating earth. So what exactly is being divided? If the first light was not merely a physical environment, but the sudden, blinding birth of the heavenly host, then this division changes completely. God is not setting a clock. He is drawing a boundary line. He is taking this blazing, newly conscious spiritual army and separating it from the absolute, unformed darkness of the deep. See the scene. The void is no longer empty. The waters are hovering in pitch black, but above them, a massive, structured hierarchy of burning entities has just opened their eyes. Jubilees chapter 2 continues its relentless catalogue. It states that on this same first day, God created the angels of the spirit of the winds, the angels of the clouds, the angels of darkness, of snow, of hail, and of hoarfrost. He is not just creating weather, he is assigning governance. The physical forces of the earth are being inextricably bound to the spiritual entities created from them. The unseen realm and the physical realm are fused from the very first second. Day 1 is not an empty stage waiting for actors. It is a mass deployment. Moses is writing down a military structure inside the thick, dark cloud. The void is suddenly teeming with assigned watchers. But these newly formed entities are not just drifting over the dark waters, they are immediately stationed. And the highest ranking among them, the ones forged directly inside the hottest center of that primordial light, are assigned to a place of absolute terror. Where exactly did the angels of the presence go the second they were born? Look up into the throne room. Isaiah chapter 6 verse 2. Above it stood the seraphims. Each one had 6 wings. With twain he covered his face, and with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly. The word seraphim translates directly from the Hebrew saraph. It means the burning ones. They are not soft, biological men with bird wings. They are localized, conscious pillars of fire. We see them in Isaiah, already ministering. We see them again in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 13. As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, and like the appearance of lamps. Burning coals, fire, lamps. Where did this specific, terrifying anatomy come from? Go back to the dark waters of Genesis 1, before the voice spoke. Genesis 1, verse 2. And the earth was without form, and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Look again at that word spirit, ruach, wind, breath. The invisible kinetic force moving over the pitch-black deep. The Book of Jubilees insists that the creation of the heavenly host did not happen in a vacuum. God did not simply manifest biological beings out of nowhere. According to this ancient text preserved in Ethiopia, he forged them directly out of the raw, violent elements present on the first day. I offer this as their ancient framework, a way the early readers understood the mechanics of the unseen world, not as dogmatic theology, but sit with the text. When the voice commands, "Let there be light," the primordial fire ignites. It collides with the ruach, the wind. And in that explosive, pre-solar flash, the highest angelic orders are born. Jubilees chapter 2 literally names them the angels of the spirit of fire. Same wind, same fire, same entities. This completely changes how we view the heavenly host. They are not physical in the way we are physical. They do not possess carbon or DNA or blood. They are elemental. They are composed entirely of the first light and the first breath. Psalm 104, verse 4 told us, "He makes his ministers a flaming fire, Jubilees takes that verse and removes the poetry. The burning ones of Isaiah 6 are burning because they were born inside the first cosmic ignition. They are constructed out of the exact same light that pushed back the dark on day one. This is why they do not age. They are sustained by the perpetual energy of their own primordial creation. But watch what the ancient scroll does next. It categorizes the heavenly hierarchy based on these elements. The highest orders, the angels of the presence and the angels of sanctification, are made of the pure spirit of fire. They are stationed immediately at the throne. They never leave the source of the heat. They are born ministering. They wake up singing. But as the ignition of day one ripples outward, away from the throne, and into the cold, dark void, the nature of the creations begins to shift. Jubilees records that the lower orders of angels were formed from the heavier, darker elements: the wind, the clouds, the snow, the hail. The spiritual army is fundamentally divided by its proximity to the first light. The blazing ones stay close to the throne. The colder, denser spirits are pushed outward, assigned to the physical machinery of the newly forming earth. A terrifying grid is being laid down in the dark, an infrastructure of watchers, inextricably bound to the weather, the atmosphere, and the dirt. But if the highest angels are locked in the fire of the throne room, what exactly is the assignment of these lower spirits who were forged out of the cold and the dark? Look at the thick cloud on the peak of Sinai. Moses is writing down the ledger of creation. The entity dictating the timeline of the Book of Jubilees to him is not a lower-level messenger. The text identifies him exactly, the angel of the presence. Turn to Exodus chapter 33, verse 20. God tells Moses out of the cloud, "Thou canst not see my face, for there shall no man see me and live." Look at the Hebrew word for face, panim. It translates directly as face, but it is a plural noun. It means the presence, the sheer, lethal proximity of the Creator. It is a space so violently holy, so heavily charged with uncreated glory, that biological flesh incinerates upon entry. No human can cross that boundary. Stop right there. If no man can see the panim and live, who can? Jubilees chapter 2 answers the paradox. The highest-ranking entities forged on day one are officially designated the angels of the presence, the angels of the panim. They are the only created beings capable of standing in the lethal blast radius of the throne, because they were constructed out of the very same primordial fire that ignited the universe. Same fire, same nature, same space. We see this exact title bleed into the canonical texts. Isaiah chapter 63, verse 9. The prophet is recording the history of Israel in the wilderness, and he writes, "In all their affliction he was afflicted, and the angel of his presence saved them." We see it again in the New Testament. Luke chapter 1, verse 19. An entity materializes in the temple to speak to a terrified priest. He announces his rank before he announces his name. "I am Gabriel, that stand in the presence of God." Read that again. Gabriel does not just say he is from heaven, he is stating his specific military classification. He is an angel of the panim. He is day one, top-tier infantry, forged in the first light. He was born staring at the face. But Jubilees lists a second group right beside them. The angels of sanctification. Picture it. The void is dark. The first light has just shattered the shadows, giving birth to the highest host. The angels of the presence are locked at the throne. But the angels of sanctification are positioned at the edge of the fire. Look at their title. Sanctification comes from the Hebrew root kadash, to cut, to set apart. They are the boundary keepers. Their sole existence is to maintain the razor-thin line between the absolute holiness of the Creator and the raw, unformed void of the physical universe. I offer this as their ancient framework, a window into how the early Jewish writers understood the architecture of the throne room, not as final canonical doctrine. But watch what this architecture implies for the rest of creation. If the throne is fire, and the angels of the Panim are fire, they are inextricably bound to the first light. But day one was not just light. It was unformed matter. It was the deep. It was the Ruach moving over the pitch-black waters. When the explosive birth of the angels rippled outward from the throne, it hit the cold elements, the wind, the clouds, the darkness itself. And according to the Ethiopian preservation, the entities forged out there, far from the throne, did not look like Gabriel. They were not made of the pure spirit of fire. They were woven directly into the heavy, chaotic machinery of the newly forming earth. The highest orders are safe inside the light, but what exactly wakes up inside the absolute dark? Stand in the storm with Job. Job chapter 38, verse 22. God is speaking out of the whirlwind, relentless, asking the broken man about the physical machinery of the earth. He is no longer talking about the foundation of the dirt. He moves into the atmosphere. He asks, "Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow? Or hast thou seen the treasures of the hail, which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war?" Stop right there. We typically read treasures as storehouses. We read this as God claiming control over simple meteorology. But look at the language. Storehouses of snow, hail reserved for battle. This is military terminology. God is not describing a weather pattern. He is describing an armory. And if the Book of Jubilees is right, that armory is not empty. Go back to the exact inventory of day one dictated to Moses on the mountain. Jubilees chapter 2 records that as the primordial light rippled outward from the throne, hitting the cold, unformed void, the heavier elements gave birth to a different kind of host. The ancient text names them explicitly: the angels of the spirit of the clouds, the angels of darkness, the angels of snow and of hail and of hoarfrost, the angels of the voices and of the thunder and of the lightning. See the scene. The dark waters of Genesis 1 are no longer just water. The ancient Jewish mind did not view the physical world as a dead, mechanical system. They viewed it as occupied territory. The weather was not random, it was governed. The entities forged in the outer rings of the first day were woven directly into the atmosphere, the storms, and the deep. I offer this as their ancient framework, a window into how the early readers understood the forces of nature, not as final canonical doctrine. But watch what happens when you lay this Ethiopian preserved timeline over the rest of your Bible. Suddenly, the strange, animated language of the elements makes terrifying sense. Turn to Revelation chapter 7, verse 1. John the Revelator is watching the apocalypse unfold, and he writes, "And after these things I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree." Read that again. They are holding the winds. The Greek word is krateo, to use physical strength to restrain. To arrest, the wind is not just an atmospheric pressure drop. It is a force that requires a localized, conscious entity to hold it back. The weather has handlers, and those handlers were born on day one. When God spoke into the dark, he was establishing the grid. The highest angels of fire were locked at the throne. The heavy, dark element angels were assigned to the boundaries of the physical earth. They are the voices in the thunder. They are the unseen hands holding the storm. Look at Psalm 148, verse 8. Fire and hail, snow and vapor, stormy wind fulfilling his word. Fulfilling his word. A dead element cannot fulfill a command. It requires a consciousness to obey. The entities of day one are the invisible infrastructure of the physical universe, stationed in the snow and the hail, waiting for the day of battle. One primordial flash. Millions of distinct, burning consciousnesses waking up in the dark. But if this massive heavenly assembly was indeed forged, the moment the first light pierced the unformed void, it forces us to look at the very next verse in Genesis with profound dread. What exactly was God doing when he looked at the newly formed light and decided to physically cut it away from the dark? Read Genesis chapter 1, verse 4. The ignition has just happened. The void is no longer empty. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. Stop right there. We read past this verse effortlessly. We assume it is simply the establishment of our 24-hour clock, the sun going down, the transition of evening to morning, but read the timeline exactly as it is written. The sun will not exist for 3 more days. The moon is not there. The physical mechanics of a sunset do not exist yet. You cannot have a shadow without a localized light source hitting a rotating sphere. So what exactly is the Creator tearing apart? If the Ethiopian preservation of the Book of Jubilees is correct, and the first light was the sudden, explosive birthing of the angelic host, then this division takes on a terrifying weight. God is not setting a clock, he is sorting an army. I hold this as their telling, an ancient Jewish grid for understanding the cosmos, not as final canonical doctrine. But watch what happens to the text when you look through that grid. Picture the scene. The unformed void is suddenly swarming with conscious entities. Millions of them, the highest orders blazing with pure fire near the throne. The lower orders woven into the heavy, chaotic elements of the deep, the clouds, the snow, the wind. The canonical text says God saw the light, that it was good. He does not say the darkness is good. Instead, he draws a hard, impenetrable boundary line between them. Look at the Hebrew word for divided, badal. It means to separate, to sever, to permanently cut one thing away from another. He is severing the holy, newly created fire from the chaotic, unformed void. This division is not a meteorological event. It is an ontological boundary. God is telling the watchers exactly where they are allowed to operate. Look at how this exact language of day one boundaries bleeds into the New Testament. Turn to Jude, chapter 1, verse 6. The apostle is speaking of the watchers, the specific entities who eventually broke protocol and rebelled. He writes, "And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day." Read that again. Their first estate, their habitation. The Greek word is oiketarion, a specific, assigned dwelling place. They had a territory, and when they broke that boundary, their punishment was not just a geographic prison. It was elemental. They were bound in darkness, the exact element God severed the light from on day one. We see it repeated by Peter. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be reserved unto judgment." Same punishment, same element, same boundary line. The division in Genesis 1 to 4 was not merely a way to organize the work week. It was a containment protocol. The angels of the presence, the pure fire of the throne room, stay within the unapproachable light. The entities woven into the weather, the atmosphere, and the thick clouds operate at the edge of the dark. God is putting the spiritual architecture in place before he ever speaks dry land into existence. The physical earth is being built inside an already divided war zone. Every piece of the board is now set. The throne is guarded. The elements are occupied. The boundary between the holy fire and the chaotic void has been permanently severed by the Creator's voice. But there is one final thing God does on the first day. One final verse in the opening sequence that locks this entire ancient framework into a single, terrifying spoken word. What happens when the Creator looks at this blazing, newly formed heavenly host and finally calls them by name? Stand again at the edge of the dark, watery void. Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. You have read this verse your entire life. You have pictured a dead, mechanical universe suddenly illuminated by a pre-solar switch. But tonight, that physical light has a shadow. Because if the ancient chronology of Jubilees holds the true timeline, that primordial flash is not just a change in the environment, it is a birthing room. Picture it. The absolute pitch black of the deep, the invisible ruach hovering over the waters, and then the voice, the sudden, violent ignition. And in that exact fraction of a second, millions of burning consciousnesses open their eyes for the very first time. The void is suddenly deafening. The angels of the presence, woven from the pure, blinding heat of the first light, are immediately locked into the lethal proximity of the throne. They wake up singing. The angels of sanctification take their assigned places at the edge of the fire, and rippling outward into the heavy, chaotic elements of the dark, the lower orders are forged directly into the machinery of the newly forming earth. The winds, the clouds, the snow, the unseen hands taking hold of the storm. This is how you solve the paradox of Job chapter 38. When the Creator finally begins to pull the dry land out of the water on day 3, when he lays the physical foundations of the earth, the audience is already there. The morning stars, the sons of God. They are already watching the dirt take shape because they were born inside the fire 2 days earlier. Genesis chapter 1 is not silent on the creation of the angels. It is just hiding them in plain sight. They are the light. They are the wind. They are the divided dark. I offer this as their ancient framework. This is one reading, not the final word, but it fundamentally shifts how you look at the sky. We have answered the chronological silence. We have placed the watchers on the timeline, but giving them an origin date only opens a much darker door. Because if God drew a hard, ontological boundary line on day 1, if he commanded the light to stay severed from the dark, and the spiritual to stay permanently severed from the unformed void, what happens when that boundary is deliberately crossed? What happens when the entities stationed in the outer rings of the atmosphere look down at the dry land and decide they want to leave their first estate? The watchers have a beginning, but the deep is still holding the rest of their history. And the rebellion that eventually shatters the boundaries of Genesis 6 begins with the infrastructure established right here in the primordial fire of day 1. If this ancient chronological map shifted how you read the opening verses of your Bible, do 3 things before you leave. Comment the word "watched" below so I know you stayed through the fire. Subscribe to the channel, because we are going back into the Ethiopian vault to track exactly where these entities went next. And send this to one specific person who loves studying the Genesis creation account but has never heard the ancient timeline of the first light. The universe did not wake up empty.